Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Nazir daf Nun, we're going to begin on Nun Amud Aleph by the two dots, Al Kazayis Meis vi Al Kazayis Nutzel. So this reminds us of yesterday's daf on Mem Testament Bays that said that when it comes to certain times where a Nazir comes in contact with a mace, that individual will have to be Megaleach because he is considered to be Tameh. So we already mentioned that it's not just a mace, but even a kazayis from a mace, or also kazayis netzel, which literally means the kazayis, which is some type of liquid that comes forth from a mace. So that is an example that the Mishnah gives in which this person who is a Nazir will have to be Megaleach. So in this, the Gemara says as follows: Al kazayis meis, al kazayis natzel, vezu natzel. So what exactly is this type of liquid that comes forth from the body? So on this, the Gemara says, Basar hames shikarish. We're talking about a situation where you have the meat, the flesh of the corpse, in which the liquid which came out of it has now already congealed. It's gotten hardened and it has congealed. So that's what we're talking about when we're referring to this case of netzel. Says the Mafarish, shenimuach v'achach karish, that it first became liquefied and then afterwards it congealed. Umayhul shehirtiach, and when it is in a heated form, then it will bubble. So on this, the Mafarish says, shiatzim basar hames kimin mayim, when it comes out like a liquid form, the chol hani netzel kibasar hames. This liquid is considered like flesh. Dami benazmer goleach alav. Even though, again, this is not a solid form, but it's a liquid, nonetheless, it's considered to be like basar. So, hey chidami, what exactly is this case? Let's say you don't know that if this liquid or this congealed liquid, it actually came from a mace's flesh. If you don't know if that's the situation, so kikarish maihavi. What's the difference? Even in a situation where it actually has congealed, why would you say that this person is tameh? After all, we don't know it actually even came from a mace. Ela diadinan dididehu. We know with certainty that this actually came forth from mace's flesh. Afal gab doli karish. So if that's the case, it shouldn't matter. Even if it didn't congeal, the din should still be the same. That it should still be matam as well. So memarashach. So in this Gemara says, Rabbi Yomi bestam. We're talking about plainly. Says the Mafarish Kleimer, Svuk Masafkon, Ideme Savi Vilo. We're not really sure with great certainty, we don't know for sure whether or not this netzel actually came forth from the mace. We don't know. It's a suffix. Says Taisus, Kleimer diadinan dibam mizeha mace. So he says that we actually do know that it came from this mace of aliyadinan muhol ze mibsaroi oimachichu kirish. In other words, as we're going to see, so we haven't finished this yet. So if we know bestam, so ikarish, if it's congealed. So in other words, Taisa says it's not that we don't know if it came from a mace. We know it came from a mace, but the question is it considered to be like basar? So that's where it depends. If it congeals, then moyelhu, it's considered to be like from the flesh. Loy karish, but if it did not congeal, then dil machicho v'niyahu. Then maybe it's saliva or mucus of the body. So even though it did come from the body, but maybe it's not basar, but rather it's like saliva and mucus, which is not tameh. So therefore, because of this situation of a doubt, we still will say that in this case, you still have to be megaleach. Okay, which is a strong chiddush. Okay. So Bamine Abayim Rabba. So on this, Abaya poses the following question: Yesh netzel behema or a netzel behema. So we know that there's concept of netzel when it comes to a person, that a person can be considered tameh and he'll have to, as a nazir, to shave. How about when it comes to a behema? Now, what does this matter? So Taisa says, Kazayas min avela. If let's say you have a netzel, which is the measurement of it, because that's from a nevela, from a carcass, shenirkav, that it's spoiled me'elav in the muach, and then it end up becoming liquefied. So we say that this tumas nevela is actually going to be matama b'mag b'masa. V'lo inyan giluach the Nazir kaboy. So Taisa says it has nothing to do with the Nazir over here, because if a Nazir touches an animal, a dead animal, he's not going to be tummy mace. It's only by a person. However, a person who does touch a nevela will become matama b'mag b'masa. So the question is, in that circumstance, do we say the din that this person is going to be considered as a individual who is tummy mag b'masa when it comes to being in contact with an animal? So that's the Gemara's question. So what's the depth of the question? Mi amrin and gemiri natzel the asim adam. Do we actually learn, just as we've established, there is this halacha that when it comes to the liquid of a mace that comes from a person, that so too it would be the same thing when it comes to an animal. Maybe in other words, maybe the whole din is dafka when it comes from a person, but not from an animal. So what's the difference? If it's netzel, if it's practically what it is, so the dinim should be the same. That if you have this congealed liquid, so maybe the din should be again that it should be matamba magal masa. So Gemara says like this: Hanichol madiarmer tuma chamura ad lager. So when it comes to tuma chamura, which has to do with the din of nevela, says Taisus, hayu tumas nevelos latami adam b'mag b'masa, which is very strict. It's ad lager. What is that? If it's considered to be inedible so much that this liquid or this food is inedible, that a ger, namely a ger tashav, it's inedible for a ger tashav to eat this, is a nevela. So when it's liquefied into netzel, it isn't fit to be eaten. So it would not be like tumas nevela. So again, if we're dealing with something that even a ger tashav is not able to eat, but tumakala alakela shopper. Now, when it comes to tumakala, it's we're more lenient, and it's only to the point that a dog can eat it. Says the Mafarish, Kolzman shel tisul machilos kelev, as long as a dog can still eat it, she'enu musrachas kolkach, it hasn't spoiled so much, kelev enu roitzel achloi, so then that's fine. Elmandi amar tuma chamura ad lekelev. But if you want to tell me Tuma Chamura is until the eating of a kelev, so then what are you going to say? Says Taisus Koimer, is it considered to be like this liquid, chashiv, like the basar of a nevela, because this liquid form or congealed is still something which a dog would eat. Maybe we will not compare it. Even though a dog would eat it, so in other words, are we comparing it to the level that it's something in which is ad lager? And when it comes to ad lager, so a ger is not going to eat this, so therefore it should not be matama tumasoichlin. It should not be matama agamasa. However, when it comes to if it's ad lekelev, so then in that situation, the Madi says that tuma chamur is ad lekelev. So this is something in which a dog would still eat. So Tashma. So the Gemara says that this hamachuhu baor tamei, a person who dissolves this by the fire. So the din is it's tamei. Says the Mafarish, chaylev nevela shehichmuhu beor. So if you have this fat which came from a nevela and it was dissolved with fire, tame, because it's still considered, says Mafarish, dedain oichel roihu, it's still considered to be food. B'chama tahar. However, if it was dissolved in the sun, then it's considered to be tahar, because we say that tuma is gone. So if it would dissolve because of the sun, it should also be tamei, because says the Mavarish, v'yisach netzel behema kafil hamachtoi b'chama habitaver kichaz v'karish. So it should still be tamei if it's because it is something which is royal achilas kelev. So amos memachiles. The Gemara says 1 second. When did it dissolve? Basir the asrach b'chama, only after it's spoiled in the sun. Even the asrach havilei offer. Once it's spoiled in the sun, it's like dirt. Says the Mafarish. So the Mafarish says v'kivan the asrach sulu chazi achilas kelev. That once it's spoiled, it's not even fit for a dog. It's not going to be matama tomakawa. So this is not a raya in any way, because the reality is it's because it's completely spoiled, and it's not even fit for a chilas kelev. Says Taisvis, behema abachama tahar tikasheminuach bachama, when it's dissolved by the sun, hu matzriach muchim hashemesh. It ends up spoiling because of the heat of the sun. But in a royal achilas adam, it's not fit for a person. Lokach hu tahar. V'yisach dadiyeshin etzel behema b'hu adil nevelas oif tahar. Afil b'chama nami l'tam. Dikati hu royal l'chelev. It's still fit for a dog. El shmamina de'in netzel. There is no din netzel by behema lokach hu tahar. Right? That's what we said. The Gemara says no, it's not true, because at the time it's considered to be like offer. Says Tyson, to have like offer, to have a kelev in a roy. It's not even fit for a dog. Okay. Weiter. Tanan kol hanitzuk tahar. Anytime you are pouring a tahar liquid, it is considered to be tahar. Says the Mafarish. Kol mashkin. Any liquid, shemarikin mekli el kli, that you're pouring liquid from one vessel into another vessel, even if the bottom one is tamei, v'kiluach yarid mesafel asaf, and it's going from edge to edge, we don't say chibur. Chibur is a connection between one kli to the next. So when you pour from the top kli to the bottom, even though it's true that while you're pouring, there is a seemingly connection, because there's this liquid coming forward, it's hitting the bottom, there's some liquid still in the top, we don't say there's chibur. And therefore, even if the bottom kli is tamei, it's not going to be matam of the top kli. Therefore, we say kol hanitzuk, any pouring of a tahar liquid, the top kli will still be tahar, chutz midavash, except when it comes to davash hazifin, which is this forged gold, honey. It says Mafarish, Ma'oiso davashu ava. It's very thick. V'yachayin l'zayfo arabo mashkin acherem, and you are able to like water it down and mix it with other liquids. V'hasfichis. Sfichis says the Mafarish, kamo kesfichis bedvash, which is like a dough fried with honey. Because it's a very thick liquid, you pour honey, so because the liquid is so thick, so therefore in that situation we do say that there is chibor, there's this connection to the top one, and therefore it will actually make the top kli and its contents tamei as you're pouring it into the bottom. As we continue to Nun Omid Beis, Beishami Oimrim, not only when it comes to honey and this other dish, Af HaMikvah Shel Grisen, even if this we're dealing with a thick cereal, the Shel Pool, as well as whole beans, Shehi Soyuledes Leachareha, because when you pull back some of the liquid, some of it comes back with it due to its thickness. So the idea again is when you pour it and you pour it back, so even though there was some liquid that was already out of the kli, but because it's so thick, it went back into the top kli. So therefore we see this connection, and that's why it's called a chibor, when the liquid or the item that's being poured is of a thick substance. So boy rami barchama, yesh nitzuk l'oichlin o ein nitzuk l'oichlin. So we already asked the question whether it's nitzuk when it comes to whether or not there's this notion, which we've been talking about, netzel, but we say that there's this nitzuk not only when it comes to liquid form, but also when it comes to food. So that's the Gemara's question. Mi amrin mishum de'ispahu riri Is it because there's these strands, and we said therefore it flows backwards? However, when it comes to oichlin, it doesn't have strands, namely that it's not going to go back in. Oh, dilma mishum disamichin, or is it because it's thick? Who the hacha hasamichin? Also, when it comes to certain foods, they're also thick. Says the Rush. When you pour from one vessel to another, again, it goes back in to the top. If you have the fat of a mace and it is complete, and then it melted afterwards, so the din is it is tameh. Hayam foirid v'heticha tahar. If let's say you separated the pieces of fats first and then you they melted, so then it's tahar. If you want to tell me there's no din of nitzuk, so sholim v'hetichu nami l'tahar. If it's complete and then it dissolves, it should also be tahar. So why is it tameh? It must be because we hold them nitzuk even by oichlin. Here, what are we talking about? Kigon, for example, that when the fats melted on the fire, solik amudin naharu apuma de mana v'karish, that you took it up from the fire and with this kli, and then it dissolved, and then it congealed. The isa kuhu gabi hadadi, so it all took place within one another. So Amrule Ravino Ravashi Tashma. So again, it doesn't bring a raya. Beishami Amrim Af HaMikvah Shel Grisen, the Shel Pul Memneshin soiled in Lacharehen. So these are foods. So L'chaira, we see clearly that we have this din of nitzuk even my foods. Midi ira hasam mishum the semichin hacham mishum riri. Over there, we were saying it because the semichin, because it was thick. Bahacha mishum riri. So over here, we're talking about where it goes back. So it's even if it's not thick. So we're not talking about a situation where it was thick. So if it was thick, you're right. However, we're talking about where it's not a thick food, but it still will go back. Okay, that was what the question is. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily establish the answer whether or not when it comes to oichlin, in which we're dealing with something which does not have riri, does not have strands. So that's the question. So, or again, even though it may be smichin, it's thick, maybe that's the reason why it works. Like over there, it works. But maybe it has to also has to have strands that it has to be able to go back. Velmoli tarbid rekev. And then the Mishnah said that there's also a din of the Nazir who will have to shave in the case where he comes in contact with even a spoonful of dust, of decay of a mace. So the kamashir, what is exactly the spoonful? So chizki omer moli pisas hayad. It's enough to be able to fit into a palm full, even with not including the fingers. Rav Yochanan omer moli chafnav, which means that's inclusive, not just the palm, but also including the fingers. So it's a larger shear to become tameh. Tanan, moli tarvid rekev she'amru. Our Mishnah, when it talked about a spoonful of this dust, of the decay of a mace, yashnan mi'ikar etzbois ulamawa dibra meir. It's referring to the fingers, the ikar etzbois, and lamala, the fingers and upwards, is what it's referring to. Chachamim omer mali chafnav. According to Chachamim, as we said, like the Shita Rav Yochanan, it's the palm with the fingers. Rav Yochanan hu di'amar k'Rabbanan. Rav Yochanan is exactly the same as the Rabbanan. He's talking about not just the palm, but also the fingers. El Chizkiah, according to the Shita of Chizkiah, that said it's moli pisas hayad, just the palm. Come on, look, Rameir Rabbanan. He's certainly not like the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan say it's the whole hand, not just the palm. And Rameir says it's just the fingers. So, and not the palm. So which shita do we find that it's only the palm of the hand? So Gemara answers two answers to this question. So Amri Moli Pisas Hayad, when we're talking about Pisas Hayad, when we're referring to the again, the Pisas Hayad, the palmful without the fingers, Umoli Kishrei Etzboisav, or when Rameir mentions the fingers, Ulamawa Chachirhu. So in other words, this amount and this amount is really the same measurement, and therefore it's not a machlokus, and therefore he could just fit into that shita. Amrule Rav Shimi Barada Barapapa Memai Dahai Mikishri Etzboisav Ulamawa L'Roish. How do we know that when we're saying it says Kishri Etzboisav, that he's referring to the fingers, the fingertips? Dilmulamata midide. Maybe he's talking about from below the finger. Below the fingers are the Havile Mali Pisas Hayad, which is the actual palm. So it's not that he's talking about measuring from here up, but it's talking about measuring from here down. And therefore that's talking about the palm, which is exactly the same thing that what was said by Chizkiah. So therefore, either you can say it's the same physical measurements, or it's actually they were saying the exact same thing, and therefore we do find that Chizkiah can fit into one of the shitas. Okay, we'll stop there. Let's see only one question on this whole daf, which is question 2. Chizkiah the Oimer Shir Demoli Tarvid Kamoli Pisas Hayad. He says it was Kamoli Pisas Hayad, which is what we said was the palm, which is the palm without the fingers. Kashadi Omer Deloy Kaman Deloy Rameir. Omer, because he says Mikishra Etzboisav Ulamawa above. And the Chachamim say the whole hand, basically, the palm and the fingers. So how's it shaykh that he could hold like Rameir? So either the Moli Kishri Etzboisav Ulamawa is the same measurement, the same distance as the palm. So therefore it's Chad Shiruhu. Or when it says Mikishri Etzboisav Ulamawa Hainu Litzad Haguf, that's referring to the side of the body. Hainu Pisas Hayad. So therefore, he wasn't actually saying anything different, just used different language, but it was the same thing. He's referring to the size of a palm, and if one would come in contact with the decay or the ash of a mace, which is again that measure, then he'll become tameh to the extent that he'll have to be megleach, he'll have to shave as a Nazir who is tameh. Ad kan.